I had always dreamed of trekking through a dense rainforest, camping right in the heart of one of the wildest regions on the planet. Stories about the Amazon had always fascinated me. The risks, its immense size, and the strange creatures that called it home. It was as if the jungle had its own heartbeat, its own spirit. So, when the opportunity finally came, I didn't hesitate. I packed only the essentials for a few days and set out for an adventure, alone, deep within the forest. The first few hours of hiking were just as thrilling as I'd imagined. The air was alive with the sounds of birds and insects, the towering trees forming a canopy overhead so thick that only patches of sunlight broke through. Occasionally, I spotted glimpses of animals darting through the underbrush, but they were always too quick for me to identify. Being surrounded by that untamed wilderness made everything feel surreal, like I traveled back in time to a world untouched by civilization. Around midday, I came across a small clearing by a shallow stream. It seemed like the perfect spot to set up camp. I pitched my tent, had a quick bite to eat, and wandered the immediate area to get my bearings. The dense foliage made it hard to see much beyond a few feet, but I figured as long as I stayed near the stream, I wouldn't lose my way. As the afternoon light began to fade faster than expected, the jungle grew darker and cooler. I gathered some dry wood and lit a small fire, watching the flames flicker as the shadows stretched and deepened around me. Then I noticed it. Something was off. The usual sounds of the forest, the buzzing insects, rustling leaves, and distant cries of animals, all stopped, replaced by an unnatural silence. I tried to convince myself it was just the transition from day to night, but the stillness felt eerie. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I scanned the area, but the flickering firelight only revealed dense trees and undergrowth beyond its glow. Beyond that, the darkness was impenetrable. Every little noise, a twig snapping, a leaf falling, made my pulse quicken. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it into the jungle, but all I saw were shadows. Whatever was out there remained hidden. The night felt endless. I barely slept, my nerves frayed as I kept hearing faint sounds. Footsteps, breathing, branches cracking. But whenever I checked, there was nothing. By dawn, I was drained but determined to leave. I packed quickly and began retracing my steps, constantly on edge. The uneasy sensation of being watched stayed with me, making every rustle in the foliage feel ominous. Every few minutes, I glanced back over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone following me, but the path behind me remained empty. As the jungle began to thin out later in the day, I allowed myself a sliver of relief. That was when I saw it. A footprint pressed deep into the muddy trail. It wasn't mine, and it didn't belong to any animal I could think of. It was large, barefoot, and fresh. Whatever had left it was nearby. I froze, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a fleeting movement, something darting behind the trees, too fast to make out clearly. It looked human, or at least human-like. I didn't stay to investigate. Panic surged through me and I started running. The jungle felt like it was closing in, every branch and shadow conspiring to hold me back. My heart pounded as I sprinted, the sound of heavy footsteps closing in behind me. It was as if the forest itself wanted me gone. When I finally burst out of the trees and into the open, I was drenched in sweat and gasping for air. I turned back and stared into the jungle, but nothing moved. The silence had returned, as though the forest had swallowed up whatever had been following me. But the feeling didn't go away. Even as I returned to safety, that overwhelming sense of being watched clung to me. The memory of that footprint haunted me. Whatever had made it had been close, so close, and I realized something chilling. It had been there the entire time, watching me, following me, and waiting. It hadn't attacked because it didn't need to, and that thought still keeps me awake at night. I had been camping alone for a few days, trying to clear my mind. This secluded area was my go-to spot whenever I needed peace. It was a long stretch of dense woods where hardly anyone ventured. The trail wound through thick forest and steep hills, so quiet it felt like the rest of the world didn't exist. That's what drew me there. But after 2 nights, I started to get an uneasy feeling deep in my gut. It wasn't something I could explain, just a vague sense that something was off. At first, it felt like a small shift in the air. I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on me. Spending days alone in the wild can mess with your head. Still, the feeling lingered, refusing to leave. I kept brushing it off, thinking it was just nerves. Maybe I wasn't used to being so far from everything for so long. On the 3rd day, I decided to hike to a nearby stream to refill my water supply. The trail was just as quiet as before, with only the sounds of birds, rustling leaves, and the crunch of my boots to keep me company. But as I got closer to the water, something caught my attention. A scrap of red fabric caught on a low branch. It flapped in the breeze, looking completely out of place. Then I noticed the footprints. Fresh impressions in the dirt, but they weren't what you'd expect from a casual hiker. They were deep, heavy, like someone had been running. The tracks led away from the river, straight toward my campsite. My heart pounded as I froze for a moment, realizing I wasn't alone out here. Someone had been wandering nearby, and I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. I decided to follow the tracks back, keeping as quiet as possible, stepping carefully to avoid making noise. That uneasy feeling in my stomach grew stronger, and I couldn't shake the thought that whoever left those footprints might still be around. The trees felt darker, the air heavier, even though the sun was still high. When I finally reached my tent, my unease turned to dread. The tent had been slashed open, and my belongings were scattered everywhere. Nothing seemed to be stolen, but everything was wrecked, like someone had done it intentionally. Felt like a warning. This wasn't the work of an animal, and it wasn't some random person passing by. Someone had found my camp and left a message. I didn't waste time. I threw what I could salvage into my backpack and set off down the trail. Staying another night wasn't an option. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed. The sensation of being watched clung to me no matter how fast I moved. By the time I reached the clearing where my car was parked, the sun was beginning to set. Exhausted and on edge, I felt a sliver of relief when I saw my car untouched. I tossed my bag into the back seat, ready to leave as quickly as possible. But then something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A patrol car parked at the far end of the lot. At first, I thought it was just routine, a ranger checking the area. But something felt wrong. The driver's door was open, and there was no one in sight. Slowly, I got out and approached the vehicle. The closer I got, the stronger my unease became. When I peered inside, my stomach dropped. Blood, fresh blood, stained the driver's seat. Just a few steps away, the dirt was disturbed, as if there had been a struggle. My mind raced as panic set in. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't good. I turned back toward my car, but movement at the edge of the woods caught my eye. A figure stood half hidden among the trees, watching me. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, staring. My body froze, terror rooting me to the spot. The air felt heavy, like the entire world had stopped. Finally, instinct took over and I bolted for my car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sped down the dirt road without looking back. Even as I drove home, heart racing, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Weeks have passed, but the unease hasn't gone away. Every time I step outside, I feel that same unsettling presence. The authorities never found any trace of the officer who drove that patrol car or any clue about what happened. But I can't help thinking I know the truth. Someone or something was out there, and I don't think they're finished watching me. I had been planning this solo hiking trip for months. My ex-husband Jake and I used to hike often when we were married, so it felt strange being out here on my own. But after everything that had happened, I thought some time alone in nature might help me sort through my thoughts. I packed only the essentials and set out into the woods, choosing a trail that had fallen out of use years ago. That's why I liked it. Quiet and untouched. The first few hours were peaceful. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots and the distant songs of birds brought back memories of simpler times. I found a familiar clearing near a stream and decided to set up camp there. My plan was straightforward: spend the night, hike further the next day, and head home. As the sun began to set, the woods grew eerily silent. At first, I welcomed the stillness, but as darkness crept in, I started to feel uneasy. It was subtle at first, a nagging sensation that I wasn't alone. I built a small fire, hoping the light and warmth would ease my nerves. The flames flickered, casting shifting shadows across the trees. I tried to focus on the sound of the stream nearby, but the unsettling feeling lingered. Every rustle in the bushes or crack of a twig made my pulse quicken. These were normal forest noises, I reminded myself, but in the darkness they felt sinister. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I had been here before, and I knew the woods could feel different at night. Even so, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. I found myself scanning the edges of the firelight, half expecting to see something or someone lurking just beyond the glow. Time seemed to crawl. Eventually, I decided to put out the fire and call it a night. I climbed into my tent and lay there trying to sleep. Sometime in the night, I woke abruptly. Something felt wrong. The air was unnaturally heavy and still, and that gnawing feeling of not being alone had grown stronger. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then I heard it, a faint rustling sound just outside the tent. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay frozen, trying to convince myself it was just an animal. But deep down, I knew better. Carefully, I reached for my flashlight, trying to move as quietly as possible. When I turned it on, the tent lit up, and I heard the rustling again, closer this time. My hands shook as I unzipped the tent just enough to shine the light outside. What I saw made my stomach churn. A person was standing at the edge of the clearing, motionless and silent. They weren't far, maybe 10 feet away, staring straight at my tent. My grip on the flashlight tightened until my fingers ached. They didn't speak or move, just stood there, watching. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Slowly, I zipped the tent shut again and sat there, frozen in place, my mind racing. Who stands out in the woods in the middle of the night, doing nothing but staring? Minutes felt like hours. I didn't hear any more noises, but I could feel their presence just outside. I didn't dare close my eyes, let alone try to sleep. I sat there in the dark, listening to every sound, waiting for dawn. When the first light of morning finally came, I cautiously unzipped the tent. The clearing was empty, but the grass where they had stood was trampled flat. I hadn't imagined it. Someone had been there, just watching me. I packed up as quickly as I could, my hands trembling the entire time. I left the campsite without looking back, abandoning my plans to continue the hike. I just wanted to get out of those woods. I never returned to that trail. To this day, I don't know who that person was or what they wanted. Maybe they were harmless, just passing through. But the way they stood there, silent and unmoving, still haunts me. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed out there. We had been out in the wilderness for a few days as part of a field exercise. The task was to navigate through dense woods and rough terrain, setting up camp wherever we could find a spot. It was me and 3 other guys, seasoned outdoorsmen, all used to tough conditions. But this place felt off from the moment we arrived. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, just an eerie, oppressive stillness. It was unsettling, as if the woods were silently watching us. Still, we pressed on, sticking to the map and trying to stay on course. As the daylight faded, we found a small clearing to set up camp. We built a fire, quickly ate some rations, and unrolled our sleeping bags under the open sky. I took the first watch. The hours dragged on, and although nothing seemed out of place, I couldn't shake that unsettling feeling. The silence was too heavy, the darkness too deep. Every so often, I scanned the trees, expecting movement, but all remained still. When my shift ended, I woke the next guy and crawled into my sleeping bag, trying to shrug off the unease. Sleep came, but it wasn't restful. I woke abruptly in the middle of the night, heart pounding. The camp was pitch dark, with only the dim glow of the fire's dying embers providing any light. I lay still, trying to figure out what had woken me, when a faint metallic smell reached my nose. The scent was strange, sharp, and wrong, like blood. I sat up quietly, straining my ears. At first, all I could hear was my own breathing. Then came a faint crunching noise, like cautious steps on dry leaves. My blood froze as I turned toward the sound. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the fire's dim light, something moved. It was low to the ground, shifting in the shadows. It wasn't one of the guys. I could see them all in their sleeping bags. And it wasn't an animal. Its movements were too deliberate, too unnatural. I gripped my knife tightly, my pulse racing. The thing circled the camp slowly, its footsteps careful and deliberate. I held my breath, hoping it wouldn't notice me. Then the sound stopped. The forest fell silent again. I scanned the shadows, my heart hammering, but I couldn't see anything. The metallic smell grew stronger, almost suffocating. My stomach churned, and then I noticed it. One of the sleeping bags was empty. One of us was gone. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm, stay still. There were no signs of struggle, no tracks on the ground, nothing to explain how he had vanished. Only that awful smell remained, heavy in the air. We were trained for dangerous situations, but this was different, something far beyond our understanding. I didn't wake the others. I couldn't explain what was happening, and I didn't want to cause chaos. So I waited, gripping my knife, every nerve on edge, listening for any sign of the thing returning. The night dragged on, the darkness stretching endlessly. No more sounds came. By the time dawn broke, the forest felt normal again. Birds chirped, and the breeze stirred the leaves, as if nothing had happened. But he was still gone. There was no trace of him, no tracks, no blood, no clues. Just gone. We packed up in silence, the weight of the night heavy on all of us. None of us spoke about it, but I knew we were all thinking the same thing. Whatever had taken him was still out there, watching, waiting. As we left the forest, the unease stayed with me. I don't know what it was that night, and maybe I never will. But one thing is clear, whatever it was, it could have taken all of us if it wanted to. And wherever it is, I don't think we'll ever truly be safe. I took my aunt camping for the first time. She wasn't much of an outdoorsy person, but I thought it might be a nice change for her. We picked a secluded area near a small, calm river, surrounded by dense trees. It was serene, with the kind of quiet you can only find far from civilization. Once we set up camp, she suggested we take a short walk, so we grabbed our things and headed into the woods. The trail was narrow, and the towering trees blocked out most of the light. The deeper we went, the less we could see of the river behind us. As we continued, I started feeling uneasy. It wasn't just quiet, it was unnaturally still. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. The silence was oppressive, the kind that makes the hair on your neck stand up. I brushed it off, thinking I was overreacting, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Even my aunt, who wasn't easily shaken, kept glancing around, her usual calm demeanor faltering. We'd been walking for nearly an hour when the path split into several branches. There were no signs or markers to guide us. I didn't want to alarm her, but I couldn't tell which way led back. We tried a few different paths, but each one only seemed to pull us deeper into the forest. The surroundings became unfamiliar, and the river felt impossibly far away. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows between the trees. I tried to stay composed so she wouldn't panic, but fear was tightening in my chest. Every trail we followed led us in circles or deeper into the dense forest, like the woods themselves were trapping us. As the light faded, I began marking trees with my pocket knife, hoping to leave a trail. Yet somehow the marks seemed to disappear, as if the forest was erasing them. With darkness closing in fast, I decided we should stop and wait for morning. Maybe the daylight would help us find our way back. We sat by a large tree, conserving our energy. The cold crept in, making the night feel even longer. I tried to shake the overwhelming sense of helplessness. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Sometime past midnight, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps moving through the trees behind us. At first, I thought it might be another hiker, but the steps stopped abruptly. I strained to listen, but there was nothing, just that eerie silence pressing in from all sides. Minutes later, the sound returned, closer this time. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't just passing through. They were following us. I froze, hoping they'd leave, but they didn't. The footsteps stopped again, just beyond the nearest trees. I couldn't see anything in the pitch-black darkness, but I knew someone or something was there, watching. Neither of us slept after that. Every so often, the footsteps returned, pacing closer but never fully revealing themselves. It wasn't an animal. It felt calculated, intentional. As dawn finally broke, the footsteps ceased entirely. We got up, stiff and exhausted, and set out as quickly as possible. Even in the light of day, the forest felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon a trail that led us back to the river. Relief flooded over me, but the feeling of being watched never left. It clung to me until we reached the car and sped away from that place. I don't know what was out there that night, but it wasn't random. It felt like something had been waiting for us, something real and deliberate. I never told my aunt the full story, and she never asked to go camping again. But even now, when I'm alone in the dark, I sometimes hear those slow, steady footsteps in my mind. I never look toward the windows. Something tells me it's better not to. Last spring, my cousin Lena and I decided to get away from the city and spend some time camping in the hills. We both enjoyed exploring nature, so we picked a trail known for its stunning scenery and moderate difficulty. Our plan was to set up camp, stay overnight, and return the following morning. We arrived at the trailhead in the late afternoon and quickly pitched our tent. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ground, and the sky turned a brilliant shade of amber. As the air cooled, we had dinner by the fire, roasting marshmallows and soaking in the quiet serenity of the woods. When night fell, the forest became eerily still, with only the occasional rustling of leaves breaking the silence. We decided to call it an early night to rest for the hike ahead. Lena drifted off to sleep almost immediately, but I found the quiet unsettling. It felt as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, I heard a faint noise outside the tent. It sounded like deliberate, measured footsteps. My heart began to pound. I shook Lena gently, but she was deeply asleep. I strained to identify the source of the sound. It seemed to move in circles around our campsite. Gripping my flashlight, I carefully unzipped the tent. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, revealing only trees and shifting shadows. I listened closely but couldn't detect anything unusual, so I zipped up the tent and lay back down, trying to calm my nerves. Just as I was starting to relax, a heavy sound brushed against the side of the tent. I froze. This time it was much closer. The tent's fabric pushed inward slightly, as if someone or something was pressing against it. My mind raced with fear, but I knew I had to act. Slowly, I unzipped the tent again. The zippers sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. Shining the flashlight outside, I scanned the area. A dark figure darted between the trees, moving too quickly for me to make out any details. My chest tightened. I turned to Lena, shaking her awake in a hurried whisper. We scrambled to pack up our gear, our breaths quick and panicked. That creeping sensation of being watched never left me as we worked. As we prepared to leave, I noticed a small stack of rocks near our campsite that hadn't been there before. They were carefully balanced, as if someone had deliberately placed them there. A chill ran down my spine. We grabbed our bags and began the hike back, moving as fast as we dared in the dark. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the shadow again. By the time we reached the trailhead, the first light of dawn was breaking through the trees. We were utterly drained but relieved to be safe. To this day, we have no idea who or what had been prowling around our campsite. But the memory of those stacked rocks and the sensation of being watched made it clear we were not alone. That unsettling experience left us wary of camping by ourselves in the wilderness. Even now, I can't shake the thought that whatever or whoever had been there with us that night might still be out there, waiting for another chance. It was a cool autumn morning when I headed out on a solo hike in the nearby hills. The air felt fresh, and the sunlight stretched in long beams through the trees. My plan was to camp overnight by a secluded lake, far from the bustle of people. At first, the trail was easy to follow, winding gently through the forest. The vibrant fall foliage was breathtaking, and the only sounds were the crunch of fallen leaves beneath my boots and the occasional song of a bird. By midday, I arrived at a small open space and decided it would be the perfect spot to set up camp. I pitched my tent near the lake, relishing the peaceful atmosphere and the soft rhythm of waves lapping at the shore. As night fell, I built a small fire to prepare my meal. The fire's crackle and warmth provided comfort against the growing chill. After eating, I sat by the flames, gazing at the stars twinkling in the clear night sky. Everything felt serene, almost perfect, until I heard an unusual noise. At first, it was faint, a soft rustling sound. I assumed it was a small animal scurrying through the underbrush. But as the hours went by, the noise grew louder and more distinct, coming from the forest's edge near my campsite. I tried to dismiss it as wind or wildlife, but something about the sound felt deliberate, almost rhythmic, as if it were trying to catch my attention. My unease grew with each passing moment. The darkness made it impossible to see beyond the glow of the fire, and the occasional snapping twig or distant thud made my heart race. I clutched my flashlight, trying to calm myself, but the sounds persisted. Finally, I decided to investigate. Gripping my flashlight in one hand and a sturdy branch in the other, I cautiously walked toward the source of the noise. The area around the lake was dense with trees and tangled brush. Just as I got closer, the noises abruptly stopped, leaving an unsettling silence. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the area but found nothing out of the ordinary, at least at first. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Fresh footprints in the damp soil near the water's edge. They were large and recent, suggesting that someone or something had been there My pulse quickened as I realized I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. The footprints led into the forest, but I didn't dare follow them. The idea of something unseen watching me from the darkness was terrifying. I hurried back to my campsite, my mind racing with fear and unease. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, deciding it was safer to leave before night fully settled in. As I drove away, the dark outline of the forest faded in my rearview mirror, but the sense of dread stayed with me. The memory of those footprints and the eerie noises haunted me long after I left the hills. I never discovered who or what had been out there that night, but one thing was certain: something had been watching. The unsettling silence of the woods and the mystery of those tracks reminded me that the scariest things are often the ones we can't see, the ones that make us feel exposed and vulnerable.